We did some simulations, that was mostly me, a little bit of theory, and now, because you've heard enough of my voice this week, Robert Whittaker, who's here, has immeasurably improved and really extended and explained lots of the things theoretically.
Could you put the microphone on?
Sorry. So I'm going to talk only for a very few minutes and hand over to Robert to explain the mathematics of what we saw. So the idea is this: soap films minimise the area, and if you put a soap film between two wires perpendicular to two parallel plates, it just sits there. And so we wanted to ask the question, what happens if you put this soap film in a cylinder, in a method that I will describe in a moment. The reason we were interested, in fact, was a question that Manuel Fortes asked me many years ago, which was, what possible shapes can a platter-boarder take? And if you read Jean's paper, it says there, hold a continuous, maybe hold a differentiable. Doesn't mean anything to me. And I guess Manuel felt the same. the same. And so, if a platter-boarder cannot take all possible shapes, are there implications for foam stability? So we're going to do, in fact, three things. We're going to take a single film, two fixed diameters of the cylinder, and then we can stretch or twist this film. Or we can make the platter-boarder case, where we have fixed Y-shaped frame at top and bottom, and we can twist or extend one of the wire frames. And of course, you can continue to increase the number of vanes in this system. No longer applies to foams, but it does apply to anything that's minimizing its area. And so this is what happens. Here's the experiment. We found a use for the acetates that I used to give presentations on. That's forming the cylinder. Two pipe cleaners. You dip the thing in soapy water, you pull it out, and you get a rectangular film. And then you start to stretch, or you twist and stretch, or you stretch and twist, whatever you like. And at some point, the film is no longer planar, but it bows out. So this is a photograph of an unstable state. As soon as it's non-planar, then the dynamics takes over. And we are not going to explain the dynamics today. And then you can do it with more than one film, and you see something rather similar. So if you plot as a function of the aspect ratio, that is the height of the cylinder normalized by its radius, the twist angle at which the film goes unstable, you see, firstly, if you don't twist at all, there is a critical length to which you can stretch, and that's fairly modest. H equals 2R, 2.6R, I think. Secondly, you see that as you twist, you can't extend as far before the film goes unstable. And thirdly, you see that whether you do it with three films, that is a platter-boarder, or whether you do it with a single rectangular film, the stability criterion is broadly the same. And so we did some surface evolver simulations in sort of the usual way, used the Hessian to look at stability, and we can do all cases now. And so you see pictures like this when the films start to go unstable. So here's the instability in the n equals 3 case. And you see that the central plateau border does buckle and has some unusual shape as it's twisted. And so the filled symbols are all the surface evolver simulations for the single film, for the plateau border, and for the 4-vane case. And they really do collapse all on one point. So there's a new thing to explain, really, is why are these cases all identical? And then what is the form, what is the shape of this curve? And we assume that the experiments are just approximations to the data here caused by finite liquid fraction and experimental effects like that. So this is the form that the instability takes. Again, n equals 2, now simulated. The film bows out, as you saw before. And so here's the idea. The idea is that the film is moving round the sides of the cylinder, and in this way it can save area. So maybe it's not so surprising, but it still remains to be understood. So at this point I relinquish the microphone. Give the magic box.
Right, thank you, Simon. So I saw Simon talk at BAMC last year on this and thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could actually do some maths and solve his equations. So first of all, you need a mathematical description of the surface, and if we start off in the sort of final state that Simon was looking at in the experiments, where we stretched and twisted it a bit, then there's an obvious surface that you can consider between the two fixed diameters, which is a helicoid. So each of the blue lines across here is straight, and they just twist linearly from theta equals 0 at one end to whatever angle you twisted to at the other end, and that forms an initial surface that you can then ask whether that surface is stable or not. So we write that surface parametrically in the form given down there, and I've non-dimensionalized my cylinder, so my radius is 1 and my length is L now, so L is just the aspect ratio that we saw before, and there's a parameter K, which it turns out it's very convenient to use, which is just the total twist divided by the length. So you've got your surface, and you then want to ask whether it's stable, so we need to consider perturbations to that. And it's convenient to write the perturbations as epsilon times zeta, as a distance that we've moved from the original surface in the direction normal to the surface. So the complicated stuff here, the vector and normalization, is just a unit vector normal to the original surface. Epsilon is just a small parameter, so we can do an expansion in it later on. And the function zeta tells us how much the surface has moved at different points. And we've got fixed diameters at the two ends of the cylinder, which means that the perturbation function zeta needs to be 0 there. And because we've got the curved cylinder walls, if we try and move normal to this surface at the wall, so this is a sort of cross section, if we move directly normal to the original surface, we'd be outside the cylinder. So any perturbations at the cylinder walls will lead to a loss of area there. So the domain in my variable psi, which is parameterizing distance across this way, gets reduced if I've got any perturbation there. And if you know what the equation of the walls are, you can work out how much that area gets lost. So we want to ask whether this initial helicoid surface was stable or not, and it turns out that the helicoid surface is already stationary with respect to small perturbations. So if I write down the area of my perturbed surface, expand in powers of epsilon, there's no order epsilon term in there. It's all order epsilon squared, and because of that it means that finding where we're stable or unstable is a little bit more awkward. But you can think about it like this: if the initial surface that you've got is stable, then all perturbations will end up with a larger area. If it's unstable, then there'll be at least one perturbation that gives us a smaller area. So if you're looking at the boundary, you've got to be at a point where a perturbation that was initially had a larger area goes to have a smaller area, so you'll have a perturbation with exactly 0 area change, and that perturbation that crosses from positive area to negative area at the stability boundary will be, in some sense, the most unstable perturbation you can have. And we can use this idea to find the stability boundary. So the plan of attack is to use that mathematical formulation for the perturbed surface, write down an integral for the area, and there's two contributions to the area change. One comes from the fact that the surface in the middle has deformed, the other comes from the fact that you've got curved walls, so if you deform at the edges, you lose a bit as the walls come in. And you can focus on the most unstable perturbations by looking for perturbations themselves that are extremal using the Euler-Lagrange equations. And then another trick I used is to write the general perturbation as a sum of orthogonal modes using Fourier series in the axial direction and the parity, so even and odd functions in psi in the radial direction. And it turns out doing that the area change at order epsilon is just the sum of the area changes at order epsilon for each of those modes, so it all decomposes nicely, and you can consider each mode one at a time. And
they're off diagonal?
Sorry?
Why aren't they off diagonal?
So you basically got the orthogonality of your Fourier functions means that the integrals cancel out, and the parity things, if you integrate an even function times an odd function, you get 0. So it just happens that when you work out the total area change, you just get the sum of the ones under each mode, at least at order epsilon squared.
They're eigenfunctions. Because the operator
In
preserve what's fundamental.
some sense, yes. So it helps that there's no order epsilon area changes for anything anyway. And when you do that, there's a whole load of maths in there that I'm just going to skip over. It turns out that the critical mode at the stability boundary is given by this form here, where S1 of xi is an even function of xi, and this sign is your sort of leading order Fourier mode that satisfies the boundary conditions at eta equals 0 and eta equals L. You have to solve this second order ordinary differential equation, and that's come from the Euler-Lagrange equations to ensure that your perturbation is minimal. You've got 3 boundary conditions. That's just an arbitrary normalization. This one is saying that your S is even, and this one comes from demanding that there's no area change under the perturbation. So, yeah?
Because xc changes slightly, do you use domain perturbation to write boundaries?
Yes, so I'm subtracting off the amount of area that's equal to essentially the distance that I've had to move in from the edge of the original surface. And that's okay to the order I want to work. So you might expect this condition on the area change being 0 to involve an integral, but it turns out because your function satisfies the Euler-Lagrange equations, you can write the integral in terms of the boundary conditions. So that's why I've got that there. And that condition is actually equivalent to saying that the perturbed surface has to meet the cylinder wall normally. So we've got this system. If we pick a value of k, which tells us how much we've sort of twisted our film, there's one unknown parameter, which is L. So we can solve that system using whatever your favourite numerical technique is, and get a critical aspect ratio L as a function of the twist k. And you can do that for lots of k, and find out what you get. And you get a nice stability boundary, which conveniently matches Simon's experiments and simulations. So the red line there is my theory, the blue circles are Simon's simulations, and because we've got the theory, we can do some asymptotics and see what the behaviour is actually like close to these critical points. So the critical twist that you can't go beyond is exactly pi, and we can get an expression for what the number is down there as well. So that's all very nice. You can also see what the critical modes are on the stability boundary, the ones that are just neutrally stable there, which are about to go unstable. And we get some pictures like that. And interestingly, for large twists, the critical modes are sort of isolated near the centre of the tube. So they don't seem to involve much movement on the boundaries. And as Simon said, we thought that the instability was caused by the loss of area on the curved walls. That seems not quite to be the case when you're at large twists. And we can check that looking at what happens if we remove the curved walls from the problem completely. So rather than having the curved cylinder walls, we put in some flat walls which are normal to the original surface, solve the same problem again, and see whether it's stable or not. And interestingly, we can still get instabilities as long as we've got a total twist that's greater than pi over root 2, and there's a new stability boundary there, and the simulations from Surface Evolver back that up. And then finally, there's the case of multiple vanes. So we saw that with Surface Evolver, the two stability curves were pretty much in the same place, and using the theory, it's actually possible to prove that. It's a little bit complicated with order epsilons and epsilon squares floating around all over the place, but essentially each of the vanes behaves in the same way as the single vane case. The area loss you get, at the walls is the same sort of thing, and the only complicated bit going on is what happens in the centre, because your central plateau border can move slightly, and you might lose or gain some area in each vane there. But conveniently, when you add it up over all your vanes, that ends up cancelling out and giving you no change at all. So all of the vanes behave in the same way, your area changes in the middle all cancel out, and you're left with exactly the same stability problem to solve in the end. So you get the same stability boundary. Okay, and just to finish up some conclusions, so we've got experiments, surface evolver simulations, and now mathematical theory that all agree about the stability boundary here. You don't necessarily need curved walls to get an instability here, and we've now proved that the critical aspect ratio is the same no matter how many veins you've got coming out from the centre. And there's some interesting questions still to look at involving how real foams and soap films might actually differ from the idealised theory. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, Stefan would confirm that I don't very often perform experiments in person, but I did once take it upon myself to try to make myself an experimental plateau border inside a tube by having a suitable bit of wire at the top, etc., and thereby made my own personal discovery of this very instability. I must confess I didn't take it any further. I just said, damn, and went and tried something else. Long ago.
So the other day, I didn't hear the original session, but Frank, I guess, and John and I were talking about if you take, like the earlier, like Durian's talk, a pair of plates, you've got lots of these hex cells, and you just start stretching it. And presumably you see the same phenomenon there. And we thought we convinced ourselves that it was always second variation stable, but I think you just convinced me that maybe we made a mistake. At least I made a mistake. So if you take that and stretch it longer, you see the same instability. I think you're same analysis.
Why multiple instability?
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Why would you say it's the same?
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Okay.
But now it sounds like you almost re-derived second variation formulas, right? And actually, there are some even when you have a singular curve might be helpful. I don't know.
Nicola.
I think you discovered there was a twist soliton that was discovered sometimes, and I forgot. And that looks very much like, you remember when you have got the amount of distortion from the center to the periphery, and you find that, as you said, most of the distortion is kind of centered, is kind of getting in the middle of the tube. All right. And that seems to be as if you had a sort of a soliton at the boundary. Is it? I mean, well, Dennis, you remember that.
I remember very well.
I know we
but
worked
I don't think it
on
leads us.
that, and I forgot what it was.
I don't think it leads us anywhere interesting with only 2 minutes to lunch.
Can
Can I just say, if anybody's looking for unsolved mysteries, there is one. Nick is quite right, which he calls the twist soliton, which we've never had the faintest clue how to explain. But
we did.
if you're interested in that, it has to do with drainage and columnar structures. Come and talk to us. Anything else before we go? Right. Thank you very much. Lunch.